The Fatui, a force to be reckoned with within the world of Genshin Impact and overall just an integral part of the game. Not only do a chunk of weekly bosses fall under the name Fatui Harbinger, but many enemies are associated with them, playable characters as well, and more. They introduce fundamental concepts such as delusions, descenders, Snezhnaya, and big narwhals too. Today I'm going to analyse and break down why they work. Nothing else, just why and how they work. This will hopefully be a mega video with sections for all known harbingers that also cover the integrations of the Fatui, their relations to other domains of the story such as the Abyss, the Gourds, the Cryo-Archon, the Descenders, and the Gnosis, which is just one of those said spoilers. Spoilers, a lot of spoilers ahead. Let's get this ball rolling, shall we? We'll start where all things start, their integration into Mondstadt alongside their core concepts. Tell me how you feel about the Fatui below. There's no real focal point of this chapter, except that the Fatui are applying pressure to the main force of Mondstadt, much like the events in Fontaine. This is through diplomacy, manipulation, and wanting the greater good, which, for this nation, isn't entirely true. The Fatui are quite irrelevant in this part of the game, but Mondstadt does something important. This important action I'm talking about is simply introducing, well, the Fatui. We know they exist, and for the time being, we know them as not so good. We also hear about Snezhnaya a little bit, which, after all the future events in the story, I can easily see as solidifying that nation as the finale end goal overall. Stuff known around this time, if I remember correctly, is that the Fatui resides in Snezhnaya, alongside the Cryo-Archon who resides over that nation, also residing over the Fatui as an organisation. Overall though, we mostly know that they're bad. However, there are 3 more key things that we learn about the Fatui, though I'll get into that in a minute. You can also find Fatui skirmishers and electro-psychic mages, Sison, I don't know how to pronounce that, all throughout Dragonspawn, which as many would know is an iconic part of the nation. They aren't found frequently elsewhere however, as the Fatui are extremely frowned upon in Mondstadt, though Dragonspawn is a remote place. Now, the first of the 3 things I briefly mentioned earlier is the Cryo-Archon's dislike for Venti, at least how it seems in the First Nation. See, at the time, none of us knew the Gnosis robberies would continue down the line, so it definitely came off as a hatred for Venti, though the force behind stealing his Gnosis is clear. Wait, I haven't even explained Gnosis yet. While I'm not here to explain what they are, the surface level main objective is to steal a Gnosis from each Archon, excluding of course the Cryo one. This is interesting as it creates a dynamic. This dynamic is that both the Fatui and the Traveller actively seek each and every Archon throughout all the nations, which both causes them to always cross paths and shows what could be considered either foiling or similarity between the two. They're taking something away from each Archon, and it makes me think that if their reasoning is as human as the Travellers, who are we to judge? The reason I said it may be foiling is of course because of the possibility of a negative outcome, which is unlikely because the Cryo Shard's descriptions hints at the motivation being love, same as the Traveller, and because of how the Harbingers go about it. They always manipulate or cause things to go astray every time they're involved. Mondstadt is direct, Liyue is almost destroying a nation, Inazuma is pure manipulation and clear bad intent, Sumeru was actively hindering the Archon, and Fontaine is mixed, but Arlecchino attacks Farina. This truly interests me as it really shows that the Fatui can legitimately be on the right side, and they're only painted as antagonists in Mondstadt. Well, they are always, but I'm a fan of morally grey stuff, and if you're like me, there's clear hints at more behind the scenes. I'm excited for Snezhnaya and excited for more Harbingers. Mondstadt in fact introduces the concept of Harbingers, though very vaguely.
At last, Mondstadt's rodent ruler in the flesh.
The only introduction we have is Signora's intro, which we only learn of Harbingers due to that cutscene legit naming her during it. We then see her steal the Gnosis I mentioned from Venti right off the bat, and this works as Signora is the Cryo-Archon's favourite, and she's one of the most dedicated to the cause of the Fatui. Hoyoverse doesn't need to worry about depth yet, so to give plenty of space to dig in the future nations of the game, they simply introduced a pure Fatui Harbinger, dedicated to their cause, dedicated to the Tsaritsa or the Cryo-Archon, and dedicated to her own cause as well, which aligns with the other 2 points. Though let's just focus on the fact Mondstadt introduces Harbingers and gives them an intimidating aura. This is because Liyue doesn't need to worry about introductions, but rather give them meaning.
So, this is a gnosis. Wouldn't be caught dead wearing this ugly thing in public. Beauty is a waste when the beholder has no taste.
Venti!
Well, we have what we came here for. Come, before our dear Favonian friends arrive. Leave nothing for them to find.
From here on, I'm clarifying that every section of this video will cover a nation and how that nation contributes to the Fatui, at least till later. These sections in themselves will cover the Harbingers over time, as each and every one of them are important to these nations in their own ways. Liyue has the pleasure of introducing my favourite Harbinger, Tartaglia, on top of the Liyue already subverting a lot of Mondstadtian tropes within its story. Even the characters do too. Unlike Venti being a clear capper, Zhongli isn't. Unlike having a more innocent and straightforward story, Liyue doesn't, and on top of having a clear enemy, Liyue doesn't. This is because both the Abyss aren't involved in the plot, and while the Fatui are heavily involved, good old Tartaglia, who I mentioned, completely subverts this. La Signora builds tension-driven expectations of the Harbingers, and continues to do so for every other nation till her demise. However, Tartaglia or Childe has the rare opportunity of killing this tension, which doesn't happen again till Arlecchino, and I guess technically Childe's eventual return later in the story. Unlike La Signora being a pure mortal Harbinger, Childe isn't. Not like he exactly doesn't want to be or anything, but the way his character is written and acts just actively causes a disconnect between the Fatui and himself. This is different from Signora, who never has that disconnect. Every other Harbinger will, I'm telling you that now, and that's why she's integral to keeping the Fatui as one of the antagonistic forces. This special Harbinger serves to show you that there's more to the Fatui than just evil, and as we're only in the second nation where betrayal goes unwarranted, verisimilitude is not something that comes to people's minds. He gives depth by showing the possibility of good old Harbingers that have potential as characters outside of their affiliation with the organisation, and despite that, as Childe continues to disconnect himself throughout the story of Liyue, it eventually punishes the player for trusting him. Signora was right.
Not bad. Your swordsmanship is quite impressive. But that's about as far as you'll get.
The tension I explained earlier immediately returns once Childe betrays the player, but even then is only a build. Childe then does ironically something much more brutal than what Signora did, attempting to drown the whole of Liyue. This solidifies their role as an antagonistic force, but of course Childe isn't the only real player here. Signora is the mastermind behind everything, even lying to Childe, which helps redeem him to an extent later in Fontaine. He does literally bring his ignorance up when trying to tell the traveller that he isn't so bad, so it's clear that's the point. Signora of course just happens to be the one that knows everything, as I said, and Zhongli's gourd twist is also shown here too, really putting it on the forefront that the Fatui equals manipulation and lies, also underhanded play. That is wrong according to Childe. The tone becomes more joking, but despite this, Signora lives quietly and by herself, walking by the traveller, but they give each other an untrustworthy stare nonetheless. This once again has the feeling of tension to leave off. All of this incorporation of the Fatui keeps the possibility of evil, but it creates a clear increase of depth and interest too. You can find legitimate ways to justify some actions done by the Fatui as shown with the clear infighting. Though despite this increase in depth, a great way to display trust is to show the other party two things: vulnerability and weakness. Of course, to do so, we'll be going to Inazuma now.
That's it. Just like that. Embrace the anger. Embrace it! The wrath of the gods fills this factory, and it feeds on your anger.
What's happening? Get up!
I'd honestly consider Mondstadt, Liyue, and Inazuma to be the Fatui's own form of a prologue, which makes sense. All of these things serve clear roles in building an accurate opinion on the Fatui in our minds, and the next three will serve to build on this stuff and manipulate the story now that we understand the source material. 3 nations of prologue, 3 nations of cool stuff, and 1 nation of climax. The finale, you know, the 3-act system. Now, Inazuma doesn't actually have many Fatui involved things like the last act of the story, similar to Mondstadt. What isn't similar to Mondstadt is how much I'm about to yap on about this stuff. Let's just get on with it, alright? The first real Fatui thing that happens that I also properly remember is the appearance of a new Harbinger, who, much like Childe, has a lot of depth and gives a lot of humanity to what the Harbingers could be like down the line. He's the last Harbinger in this prologue trio of said Harbingers. I used that word a lot just then, huh? Scaramouche, the Harbinger, is creating delusions, which Childe properly introduced in Liyue. These get slightly further elaborated on within Scaramouche's section of the story as he creates them to be sold to the resistance against the Inazuma's Archon. What's interesting to me is that Scaramouche both belongs in Inazuma, and that he fits what the Fatui show in this chapter. This is the beginning of the Harbingers being introduced in their home nations, such as Arlecchino and Dottore down the line, but that's irrelevant. What is relevant is his relation to the themes I mentioned. Inazuma shows the weakness of the Fatui, which completely alienates them, as Inazuma, on the other hand, is completely hostile and seemingly impenetrable, though I guess corruption can be seen as another form of weakness, to be fair. Either way, much like how Inazuma shows weakness of the Fatui, Scaramouche is mentally the weakest Harbinger, crushed by his own mental instability and inability to accept his past. Pretty much he's an edgy teenager. He dislikes his peers by a landslide, and on top of that, one of his peers is present in Inazuma. Who could it be? Our favourite tension builder, of course, La Signora.
I challenge you to a duel before the throne.
Proceed. My, you're full of surprises today. So you've learned to make the law of the land work for you too, I'll admit that I never expected to be in a situation where the two of us were on equal footing. You are aware that the loser must die. Are you sure this is what you want?
Traveler!
Then I will deign to share this last dance with you, till death do us part!
This time she's once again seemingly on top of everything, but finally, after 3 nations of inconsistent tension and climax, you're requested to duel her. This scene is extremely important as it shows the development of the Traveler this time. In Mondstadt they couldn't fight back due to Signora's strength. In Liyue, Paimon said that they shouldn't fight Signora due to the fact that the 2 Harbingers were there. But now, when faced with a Gord that they'll have to fight down the line, and the possibility of Scaramouche's return, the Traveler goes through with it anyway, which shows an amazing form of character development. This exposition is amazing, and it's why I feel the only really good parts of Inazuma's story is the Vision Toma cutscene and the later parts of Act 3. Of course, the Traveler succeeds, and here, at this very moment, is where I feel that the Fatui's prologue properly ends. You've killed an important character, but not just that, you've killed a Fatui Harbinger. What could this mean for the future parts of the story? Well, now the Fatui is seemingly irrelevant for the time being, the focus fully shifts into the Raiden Shogun, which is interesting as it really nails the fact that there are more important things when compared to the Fatui. Sure, this happened with Childe, but he was the one who summoned the Gord. This time Signora dies to a Gord, so instead of showing just how far the Fatui can go, it's showing the lowest of them. When you thrive off manipulation and underhanded tactics, a single miscalculation can lead to death. In fact, this is the same person who outright stole Venti's Gnosis. Talk about irony. However, this specific scene goes even further down the line. For now, just remember these themes of weakness. As the story goes, you definitely go against more serious and higher up Harbingers. As I stated, this marks the end of their prologue, which is the first 3 main arcs, I'll be assuming. The second arc is the building of the Fatui now that they've introduced the 3 integral Harbingers to introducing the Fatui, and to prove my point, Sumeru and Fontaine both reintroduce the Harbingers remaining after Inazuma. I do think it's worth mentioning before I move on that in the play that the characters' names are based on, La Signora is Capitano's wife, and Capitano will be appearing in Natlan. Of the 3 nations in this second arc I'm speaking of, the only remaining OG Harbinger to return is Signora, so perhaps she'll return in some way once they have all the Gnosis or something. She is the Crimson Witch of Embers anyway. Just a theory, moving on. It's funny, huh? As I'm about to explain, the nation of Dendro is also the one where the sheer possibilities of the Fatui's power grows. Much like how Mondstadt's flexible animo introduces them, Geo reinforces the concepts of the Fatui as an organisation, and Electro shows weakness, like faint sparks of electricity. Anyway, let me elaborate on what I'm going on about. Like every other nation after Mondstadt, there are two main playing harbingers in Sumeru. The first introduced is in Acts 3 and 4, who is Dottore, or the Doctor.
What are all these people doing here at this hour of the night?
Ah, the triumphant hero returns at last. And to a rather spectacular welcome, even if I do say so myself.
You're the outcast, expelled from the Academia.
Indeed I am. Although these days they tend to call me the Doctor.
He has an extreme importance towards the concepts of Sumeru as he originally comes from there alongside being an outcast. His power is quite spectacular, with him even controlling the citizens of Sumeru City in the cutscene midway through the story. So much like Inazuma, the first harbinger shown in a nation excluding Childe and his nations is only the opening act. Despite Dottore's clear connections with the nation, his most important power is shown through a separate entity, that being a familiar face, Scaramouche.
Who would have thought the world would be so eager for my birth?
Since Mondstadt, we've seen harbingers attack, summon, and die to gourds. However, now because of Dottore, we can see one become a gourd. Scaramouche becomes the Gourd of Arcane Wisdom in Act 5, which still surprises me a year later. We've never seen someone become a gourd, but here, the seemingly irrelevant harbinger of Inazuma has now become the main threat in Sumeru, even more than the initial main objective to an extent. Though at least we know the Traveler really is fighting all the gourds, including the salty dude. This helps develop the Traveler more, as now he can literally fight a gourd with the help of the Dendro Archon, but most importantly, builds towards what I mean when I call this a second arc of the story. Sure, this arc introduces new harbingers, and unlike it being a building to Signora's death in Inazuma, it's each individual original harbinger getting their own nation's worth of development, each and every time. I don't think any harbingers past Inazuma will get as much development as the first three, or at least Childe and Scaramouche. Sumeru does the Scaramouche part. I mean, look at it. He comes back as important as ever, even when he's defeated, has a whole Archon quest and naming system, gets a vision and more. It's amazing how clearly developed Scaramouche became in only 4 or 5 hours, and I love it. Sumeru really does him justice and lives up to everything I explained not long ago about that second arc. Overall, Sumeru is focused on growth, like I said. It grows Scaramouche and even Dottore to an extent, as he leaves Sumeru slightly weaker than he entered the place, ending the lives of all his time clones. Would you consider that development? Tell me in the comments. Ignoring all that, I want to say one more thing on Scaramouche. I appreciate his return due to how Inazuma develops too. It gives us some more lore in the nation, as well as showing that weakness associated with it outside of the confines of the nation, which to me feels like a good thing. It shows that these next 3 nations will be delving into introductions, depth, and weakness along with their own concepts. Okay, time for Fontaine, and time for you to like and subscribe. Fontaine is interesting, as by this point we're a nation past the prologue already, and opinions have most definitely been formed around the Fatui as a whole by the player and characters. However, Fontaine tries to make you re-question this all the way from Act 1. While individual characters from the Fatui can seem awfully nice in some nations, this time every character from the organisation supports the Traveller, or the Traveller supports those characters. Straight from the first act we run into our returning Harbinger.
Hey, hold on! Before you go around trying to collect payments, why don't you settle your own debts first? If Confrérie of Cabriere wants to poach clients from Northland Bank, that's fine. But I'm afraid you still owe the bank a hefty sum of mora. So why don't we work things out between us first, before you get back to your little conversation here?
Childe. After the final few scenes of Liyue's story alongside some side content with Childe involved, the Traveller isn't too cautious with him or angry, though there are some remarks about him being there for official business that isn't so ethical, much like any other Fatui business, until this nation. Though despite me bringing this up in the video on this topic, he's not on any Fatui related business. Much like Scaramouche, we're getting more personal content for Childe, which I really like, though I still think is worth talking about as he is a Harbinger, and I did say there's another Harbinger too. Though before that, I want to discuss something related to that Harbinger, the House of the Hearth, or more importantly, the people inside it. 3 playable characters that you meet before Childe being Linny, Lynette, and Fremine, which are all siblings, belong to an orphanage run by one of the Fatui Harbingers, Arlecchino, or the Knave. These 3 siblings are integral to Acts 1, 3, 4, and 5, while Act 2 is dedicated to Navia, who isn't relevant to the Fatui until later down the line. However, they aren't bad. They're simply there due to circumstances from their childhoods, and on top of that, they say the Harbinger above them isn't either. This is what I mean by Fontaine is centered around the morality, fitting the nation of justice, to be fair. It's cool as well that unlike other places, excluding Mondstadt, everybody frowns on the Fatui. This is because those 2 nations are connected, though I made a separate video on that topic. The fact everyone doesn't like the Fatui helps the traveller serve justice while keeping the underdog vibe everyone likes, and honestly, they felt a lot more like underdogs since Signora's death, interestingly enough. Initially, the traveller is disappointed at the relations to the Fatui, but over time they become more than just Fatui workers, the traveller even inviting them into the gang in Act 5. Finally, the Knave is the epitome of what I'm talking about, as she even bears similarities with Signora, who was important to the prologue of the Fatui. Due to her being a Harbinger and having those similarities, much like other Fatui people, we don't trust her very much, though she's genuinely fine wanting the best for Fontaine, and she's the perfect Harbinger to bring into this nation. Of course, there's her origins, but on top of that, she's one of many masks and she isn't fully aligned with the Fatui herself. She also befriends Navia, who is herself a friend of the Traveller, so mutual friends is a thing here too, and don't forget the siblings. Of course, she isn't perfect as she attacks Farina previously and done questionable things, and don't forget the lines Scaramouche and Childe have about her.
Look, I've got nothing against people who have their own agendas. I myself joined the Fatui to get more experience in combat. But I don't like her at all. If she stood to benefit from betraying others, she'd turn against the Tsaritsa in a heartbeat. There isn't a sane bone in her body.
A wolf in sheep's clothing. To exert a higher level of control over people, she puts on a graceful and cordial front. Most of those who have seen her true crazy self have gone poof.
Finally, returning to Childe, we actually care for him in this chapter, and he's fighting the very thing threatening Fontaine as a whole alongside the citizens there. He's a support and a good person during this, and I love that. And it is truly one of the best ways to show that maybe the Fatui aren't that bad. Also, Skirk, his mentor from years ago, says that the Gnosis are the remains of the third descender, which introduces more possibilities for why the Cryo Archon wants all of them. I think this is important to understanding the organisation. As we stand now, nobody knows where the Fatui will go. They may very well be evil, or possibly the secret heroes the story needs. All I know is I've learned a lot writing this, and they're important, though we aren't done. In this section, I'm pretty much bringing up a bunch of miscellaneous stuff that wouldn't fit into other parts of this video, and to begin with, I'll briefly go over the other Harbingers, segue into some possibilities for the future, and say a few relevant facts. The future Harbingers in the game will be Capitano and Natlan, Pulcinella, whatever, Pantalone, Pierro, Columbina, and Sandrone. The only ones I particularly care about is Pulcinella, Pierro, and Capitano, though they have relevance to other Harbingers alongside Pierro being from Khaenri'ah. I think that's quite awesome, people. Anyway, most definitely Snezhnaya will have almost all the Harbingers appear. I also want to mention that the fact they released a Winter Night's Lazo after Inazuma's ending shows that it's definitely the prologue. In case you doubted me, I'm sure another teaser will release in between Natlan and Snezhnaya too. Just wait and see, I'm totally going to be right since I'm just so great. The Fatui is extremely important to the plot of Genshin Impact overall, but I definitely think they're just a red herring for the bigger problem, which is the Abyss Order. While we get occasional Abyssal content, Fatui content breathes through quite literally every mainstream storyline. Of course, Mondstadt doesn't follow this rule, interestingly enough, as it's the first nation. Also, did you know that there's only 9 Harbingers currently? Scaramouche left and Signora died, so we get that number. Finally, I want to set aside a moment for a larger theory. I was going to make this in its own video, but someone else has already covered it. I just want to say that I believe the Cryo Archon and possibly Pierro are aiming to bring back the third Descender. They're collecting pieces of them, and alongside that, it's been shown that there are healing abilities in Teyvat, as seen in Dragonspine when looking at Durin's blood. They're also the ones keeping track of who the Descenders are, interestingly enough. If this is true, the same could happen with good old La Signora. Okay, I'm done with this little extra piece of content. Just remember that the Fatui is cool. Do you think Signora will return? If you want more of these Fatui theories, check out my video about Childe in the corner.
It's time to end tonight's foolish theatrics. Right now, you have no captive audience. Let every worthy sacrifice be carved in ice. With this nation, endure for all time. In the name of Her Majesty the Tsaritsa, we will seize authority from the gods. Absolute peace. Such is the gift from the Tsaritsa. Such is Her Majesty's benevolence. Now you rest in this coffin, encased in layer upon layer of ice. But Rosaline, I promise you, your final resting place will be the entirety of the old world.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the Fatui are important. We know that, but let me answer the main question of the video, that they work perfectly. They develop, have clear thought behind how, when and why we learn about them, alongside being a way to introduce even more amazing characters such as Scaramouche and Childe. It's a technique in itself, distracting us from the abyss, building the world, characters and more. I love the Fatui and wish more stories would have things like it. The use of harbingers and underlings such as the magician's siblings is an amazing choice, alongside the morality of the organisation. I personally believe Natlan may be the final straw of how we see the Fatui, and Snezhnaya is the aftermath. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, hit the join button below, and have a good day. Peace!